Hello and welcome to the Fresh Air Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave.
And apologies for the lack of mix tonight. The day definitely got away with me. Had one of those mental days and evenings, and disobedient children to boot today. So yes, I do apologise for being late, a little bit later than scheduled, and all of that. How are you doing though, Dave? Oh, apparently you're Phil.
I'm good, thanks. Okay, that'll do.
I'll change that as well. Sorry. I keep saying I need to do this. I need some time to actually go through and put all the names in so that I can quickly, just before the stream, go on, off, on, off, on, off, instead of editing the name tag that's there. So, yeah. Anyway.
That's for channels that are much more professional than us.
Hey, we've got to pretend
We're
to be
here
professional.
for the lulz.
We got to fake it till we make it, Dave. That's what I hear from the interwebs.
Yeah, I don't buy any of that. Authenticity, that's what counts.
We just fuck it all up. Oh, I've forgotten this. I've reversed this camera on this in this one as well. It's like everything you can actually see what's you can see what's being said on things. Yeah. Sorry.
And weirdly, you're facing each other on my dual screens. You've been reading Think.
No, I was just showing that it comes
it's the right
through
way round.
the right way round because I reverse it this way. But now when I'm looking at you, I'm actually not looking at you here yet. In whatever that thing's called, Discord. There you go. So yeah. Anyway, enough of my fumbling around. The reason we're here tonight is we're just doing a quick stream. That's sort of continuing with some ongoing themes. There's a lot of common atheist arguments that keep popping up. Now, the most recent one that's resurfaced again is obviously the Christmas was stolen from the pagans. Which we're not going into tonight, but these things circle round. And when I wrote the article, it might have only been about a couple of weeks ago I wrote it. This argument talking about atheism being the default state or the default position was coming around again. It was, it's almost like the rocks are atheist thing was being left to one side, and they're going on with the default position, and babies are atheists and all of that thing again. So I figured it might be.
Who says there's no atheist rituals? These seem to happen at least once every year at around the same time.
I think with the default position one and babies are atheist ones, it sort of happens every Sunday, doesn't it?
Yep. It's almost like it's some kind of verse from some kind of book.
The Little Book of Ra, printed on the back of Baby Atheists. So, yeah, obviously, if this is your first time to the stream, Dave and I are both atheists ourselves. We believe gods do not exist, and we feel we can justify our position well enough to it be called a rational position. We've done plenty of streams on that, but one of the things that we do like to do is look inwardly at our own. So that includes other atheists, as well as ourselves and each other. I mean, it's how we try and keep each other honest and on the ball and playing devil's advocate and the like. But we have done a number of different articles and streams about bad atheist arguments or common atheist memes and things like that. So tonight is going to be an extension of that. So I'd just like to say hello to everybody who's tuned in. Hey, so Emily, Craig, Mark, and Frida, and Philip. Oh, and Icarus. Hello. Nice to have you in the chat nice and early with us. In fact, actually, it is really early for some of you. Most of you don't usually tune in until about 10. So thank you so much for joining us at 9. Especially as I am going to bet, incorrectly, that we're going to be finished by 10 tonight.
That's what my missus normally says at about 5 to 10.
Hello, Bible, and Andy Rants, and Carl Eaton as well. Nice to have you in there. So, obviously, the one thing that I do actually need to do is switch everything around. So I just need to put things into be right back whilst I sort out the screens, and we will be back in just a couple of minutes. Okay?
In 2 shots of a bourbon.
I might not have time to go and get it. In fact, no, I don't have time to go and get it. Don't worry, though. You lot have put me in a good enough mood to continue without the bourbon.
You know, just to get my both my degrees and my canvas in.
You got to. You're the only thing that gives our stream any credibility, Dave.
No, that's Philip.
Yeah, but he's not here. But yes. So, hi folks. Andy, yes, I did see your question. I was trying to get the kids down as I saw it. I have read it. I even started writing a response to it, and I will come back to your question on Twitter. If there's time, we'll address it at the end. Just catching up on the chat quickly. Apparently, this is going to be a new one to Kyle. So, Kyle, when you're saying it's a new one to you, is it new that some people say atheism is the default position, or is it new that some people say it's a problem saying that atheism is a default position? Either way, let me know. Mark, I like what you're saying. Life is not complete without bourbon. That should be in our book. Yes. The Little Book of Joe. Well, you know, the cult leader and all that.
Exactly.
But yeah, cool. All right. So, as I mentioned, this is an article about one of our many arguments that, and by our, I mean us atheists. We have a number of arguments that I think aren't particularly great. I've got a series of bad atheist arguments and on this site, Answers in Reason, and I have in my sci-fi short series, there's bad atheist memes, and there is also some other things in the sci-fi shorts that we get wrong, like the null hypothesis. So there's plenty out there showing that, we do like to look inwards, and we are atheists ourselves. I know many like to accuse us of being theist trolls or crypto theists, or but we've given plenty of justifications for why we're atheists and what we think are strong atheist arguments, and we address weak theistic arguments too. It's just we'd rather that all the other atheists probably had stronger arguments. Anyway, enough of me chatting shit. Dave, if you could let me know of any comments that come in from the chat room, and I will load them up on screen. Feel free to stop me at any time. And didn't mean to do that. Sorry. And yeah, here we go. So the problem with atheism is the default position arguments. As an atheist, even one that doesn't feel in tune with that many other atheists, I still want to come from a position of strength. I want us to have good arguments, sound reasoning, and solid logic. This is a big part of why I have the Bad Atheist Argument series and the Sci-Fi Shorts videos and podcasts that address common misunderstandings and bad memes. Whether we like it or not, the behaviour of atheists affects us all. Reflects on us all. Sorry, my microphone's in the way of the screen. They shouldn't, but our brains are lazy, and in general, they tend to make hasty generalizations. We do it to ourselves at times too. We're often guilty of judgments of theists or specific kinds of theists, forgetting to take the time to understand the individual's position fully. So, in that sense, we see it quite often where people generalize theists to be literalists. All theists are biblical literalists, and therefore the Bible isn't literally true, so therefore, all Christians are irrational. That sort of thing. So whilst I do have a preferred definition for atheism, for this article I will stipulate the use to be absence of belief or lack of belief in deities. This article will not address any issues I find with this definition over others, but instead some of the issues with how this definition is applied. So, a common argument and a false dichotomy. One of the arguments I often hear is atheism is the default position, or sometimes atheism is the default state. A false dichotomy is created by saying that everything not atheist is atheist. One of the major proponents of this argument is Ra, and he even admits that the reason for this argument is to try and make out that atheism is the norm for everything. He hangs logic and epistemology at the door and argues from an ideological standpoint. He starts with a conclusion and fills in the blanks instead of working from the ground up. My goal today is not to discuss the issues with Ra's argument about rocks being atheists, which I believe Dave Steelmans and covers in detail in this video here, but to address key issues for viewing atheism in this default state way. So the only definition of atheism that works for this is the absence of belief in at least one deity. This is not a responsive absence, though. This is just an absent mental state. One key issue we will find to start is an absence of a mental state is not a position at all. So the default position argument has already failed, and we shall focus on the default state instead. The next issue with this argument is we don't tend to describe much of anything based purely on one thing that it lacks. Now, I know there are some things we might describe that way, but even when you think about those, you'll see that there's a culmination of other things that add to it. Rocks also don't eat animal products. By that notion, they are vegan. But we wouldn't describe anything without the ability to eat or perform any form of energy exchange in terms of something that can eat. It's completely pointless. And then to say veganism is the default state doesn't really add any power to any arguments for veganism. In fact, it would make vegans look pretty silly if they started to make these sorts of arguments. Churches are also absent of belief at least one God exists, and they don't eat animal products. Are churches atheistic vegans too? We might regard churches as theistic because they house theists and promote a theistic religion, but we wouldn't think of them holding or lacking a mental state. Religions don't hold mental states, yet generally wouldn't describe them as atheistic. The religion would be theistic if it promoted a belief in a deity, and the believers of said religion believed in a deity. An atheistic religion is one without deities, and the followers don't believe in deities. The religion doesn't hold mental states, so theistic and atheistic are not describing mental states here. It's clear there is more to using the adjective atheistic or the noun atheist than just describing an absent mental state. If we don't have a mirrored definition of atheistic and theistic, we can end up in a paradox of something being both theistic and atheistic too. And Dave actually coined on his video about this, that Ra's atheistic paradox. If anything that promotes or enables theism is theistic, but anything that does not have a belief in God or gods is atheistic, then churches and Bibles are both theistic and atheistic. So, whilst it's true that rocks, churches, and religions are absent of mental states and don't eat animal products, we can see how absurd it is to refer to them all as atheistic vegans. And with that in mind, it's safe to conclude that atheism can't just be describing an absence of a mental state, and therefore cannot be the default state for all things.
Hang on. And before you move on to the next one, there's been a couple of questions.
Okay.
Let me scroll back a bit. Kyle Eaton says he would need a proper distinction between the null hypothesis and a default position to make them not coherent in this context.
Okay, so when you're talking about the null hypothesis, a hypothesis to start with is something that can be tested. So if you think about the relationship between a hypothesis, your H1 would, an example I give, so say for example, if we were to say COVID vaccinations will reduce the number of hospitalizations. That's our H1, right? Our H0 would be that we'd see no significant difference between people being vaccinated and being hospitalized with COVID, right? So it's not the same as a default position. A default position is more of a case of something that before being presented anything, you might, or researched anything, it's basically the unthinking state, I guess, in that regard. So if it's a position on a topic, it's a response to a topic. So the default position, you could say, as a response to a topic is, or that you should hold, is here's a proposition. Right, I need to look into this a bit more before I can hold a particular opinion either way. But you're holding an active position. Having a default position to an argument that you're not aware of, you're just absent of a position. You don't have a position. So it's a bit different. Does that sort of make sense?
And could I just throw one other thing in there? If atheism is just a description of a lack of mental states, it's a description of certain brain states. Like even if you lack a thing, it's a description of a brain state. So it can't be a hypothesis because it's describing something.
Yes, yeah. You're right. It's literally just a description of a mental state that is missing in that regard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it can't actually be a null hypothesis because it's not the same. They're not identical. Hang on, sorry.
Reading Mark. Absent mental state. Are you talking about me?
Yeah. And Frida said something very nice, which is this channel could be called Atheists with a Brain.
You mean we're not rock theists? Is atheism the theology of existence?
The theology of...
No?
No. No. Simple as that, no.
At its core, it's a position on one topic. I will say that there is more to atheism than that, but at its very core, it is a position on one topic. So I wouldn't say it's a theology of any kind.
And Kyle says, you could say theism is the default and atheism is the null. But again, no, because atheism is just a description of either a position you take, which is the position you take if you have a certain epistemological outlook, I guess. And theism is the position you take if you have a different epistemological outlook.
Yeah. And I don't think you can really describe theism or atheism in terms of hypotheses, because you can't really test either of them. There are certain things you can test about the claims, like the efficacy of prayer, and so you could set up an experiment along those lines, like. There have been ones done. So these people are being prayed for and they know they're being prayed for. We'd expect them to heal faster than these other people. These people are being prayed for and don't know they're being prayed for. And these people know that they're not being prayed for. And the null hypothesis would be there's no significant difference between them. You might even realize from the conclusions, and one of the studies I've actually read on this, that people who were aware they were being prayed for actually healed at a slower rate than the others. But I don't think it was enough of a significant difference, because there have been other studies that have sort of gone a little bit the other way. As I said, there's no significant difference between people being prayed for and people not being prayed for, and people being aware and not being aware. And you know what? Many theists will tell you that's not what prayer's for anyway. It's supposed to be more reflective, more like a meditation, more to give gratitude to God and whatever like that. So it's showing that, it doesn't work in that way. And theists can even turn around to other theists and say, see, it doesn't work in that way. What it's supposed to be for is having a commune with God, not asking for things, not trying to heal things. If God wants to do that, he will. Sorry, I went off on one there.
No, it's all good. And in response to our no, atheism is not a theology on life, he says, what is the theology of atheists? Philip's already answered him, but you might want to give him an answer too.
I would just say, so he says, what is the theology of atheists? And Philip says, atheists have no theology.
And Philip is correct.
Yeah.
As always.
Oh, and hello, Kimmo. I didn't see you sneak in there. And Bible, I don't think I said hello to you either. But yes. With no theology, how do atheists derive how to be upon their own influence? I'm not exactly sure I understand what you are trying to get at with that, but I would say that we reason using the rules of logic and probability theory. At least that's what many of us claim to do.
Yeah.
But quite often, many turn to scientism, even though they won't admit it. Oh. I'm starting to make Hare Krishnas sound more reasonable with their communes and whatnot. Well, maybe they are. But yeah, Philip, if you can clarify that one with Andy, that'd be great, and I'll carry on reading. Unless there was anything else, Dave, that I've missed.
Yeah, sorry about that. No, that's perfect. Just thought I'd get caught up in between the chapters.
No, definitely. Perfect time to do it. Right, so the first modifier. So people might, at this point, introduce a modifier. They will say that it has to be a person to be an atheist. So this is straight out of the dictionary. Now, I know dictionaries are descriptive, but people will always look to the dictionary and say, see, this is the definition of this in here, when it suits them. So I've used the same dictionary that people use to justify babies being atheists because it's only a lack of belief, to show that, well, okay, an ist is a follower of a distinctive practice, system, or philosophy, typically a political ideology or artistic movement. You can't be born an ist. It actually says it in the dictionary, right? So even with the definition of an ist, it states that you are a follower of a distinctive practice, system, or philosophy, aka an ism. It also says that you can't be born an ist. This makes sense because you are not born following any ism or anything. So in general, ists ascribe to isms, but, language can be confusing. So I agree that an ist is one that needs to ascribe to an ism, or at least some practice that doesn't have that suffix. However, if atheism describes the absence of a mental state in a person, does that mean they have atheism, or that they are an atheism? This is, of course, an absurd take, but it does highlight that atheism is being used in an atypical way, at least in regard to how an ism is usually used, which is a distinctive practice, system, philosophy, and not merely an absence of one, and especially not describing an absent mental state. Anyway, the point that folks are usually making here is that babies are absent of the mental state of belief in at least one deity. They're not wrong. They say that because we are born without that belief, and atheism describes an absence of belief in deities, then atheism is the default state for humans. On the surface, this does seem correct, because babies do not hold the belief at least one God exists. Babies also don't eat animal products except for the milk their mother provides with consent. So they are also vegan, or at least vegetarian, if you don't agree with the consent point of veganism. Does that make veganism or vegetarianism the default state of humans? Common meme, we're all born atheists until someone starts telling us lies, but we're all born vegan until someone starts forcing us to eat animal products. That's how the babies are atheists argument actually sounds. We notice something intuitively wrong with that statement, especially if we have any understanding of the biology of humans. Sure, we don't eat animal products as babies, except with the exception of consensual milk from our mothers, but we are omnivorous creatures. We survived in our environments because of this, and it's not until someone makes the choice to be vegan or vegetarian that we would label them so. This highlights two more problems with babies are atheists argument. Identity and evolution. The first is around identity. A vegan is someone who consciously chooses to eat a vegan diet and identify as a vegan. Now, if someone grew up in a location where meat was not an option, they might be eating a vegan diet, but not actually be a vegan because they would eat meat if it was an option. Equally, a baby can't consider the reasons for being for and against, being a vegan and choose to identify as one. So in the same breath, the baby lacks the cognitive abilities to consider the proposition God exists and hold or lack beliefs as a response to this proposition. Yes, they are a human that is absent of a particular mental state, but there is clearly a little bit more to being an atheist than that. Like a vegan has considered eating meat and chosen to eat a vegan diet and probably identify as a vegan, an atheist surely has to consider if a God exists and choose to identify as an atheist. Another issue with this default state argument is that due to the way we evolved, we are prone to assigning agency. This trait helped us survive in our formative years. A rustling in the bush may have been nothing, but preparing for it to be a lion increased survival, and thus we evolved a sense of paranoia, which led to superstition and all sorts of religions and rituals. Even if we could delete all knowledge of religion and gods from people's minds, but leave everything else intact, it is likely we would still start assigning agency and be a superstitious species. We may not believe in the same gods or religions as we do now, but it's highly likely new ones would be invented. As such, the default state for humans is, at least once our brains are a bit more developed, to assign agency and be superstitious. Therefore, as a species, we're prone to God beliefs. People don't have to lie to get us to believe in gods because, as a species, we're pretty good at doing that without outside intervention. There any comments, or shall we carry on?
There's a few. Hang on.
One from
Kyle says
exist is the default ist.
And the Dadaism.
I missed that one. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Sorry. So
Kyle's.
Yep.
Well, if a default position in this sense applies to the position a baby is in instead of a position they hold, wouldn't that make it a default position? I mean, the default position for a baby is lying down, really.
Trying to lift their head up sometimes.
And shitting their pants.
Yeah, I mean, it's a completely different position that you're talking about there. You're talking about two different kinds of position. A physical position. They're not holding any positions to any topics. So yes, the default position is lying down. So if we redefine atheism to mean someone that lies down, there you go. Atheism is the default position and babies are atheists.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I said in the chat, the best you can say is that it's like a default mental state, but then like defining atheism as a lack of belief, but then you would have to show that they truly are absent that mental state. And just because they can't report on it doesn't mean that the mental state doesn't exist.
That's fair.
It could exist by accident.
Genetic memory, who knows?
Yeah. And he expanded on what he meant by his comment.
Okay.
If a will doesn't exist and there's no influence on the will, what makes an atheist want? What creates desires beyond existence and sensory perception? I feel like that's well off topic.
It is incredibly off topic for tonight. And
we could cover it another time.
We can cover it another time. Why do you think we have no will, though, as well? We have desires.
That's basically what Philip said.
Okay, cool. But yeah. Okay, so I shall carry on. No, it's not a stream about consciousness, Luke. But, you know, it does sort of tie in a little bit. It's just talking about problems with a number of the arguments about atheism being a default state. So hopefully those who've just tuned in have caught the first bit. I apologize if you don't, but I will, if you've got any questions, I will come to them. I'm answering them in between sections. It's just an article reading, and then we're going to just answer the questions. So the next bit is rationality, intelligence, and morality. Yet another issue with the default state argument is it's a defeater of other atheist arguments. Many atheists like to claim we are more rational, intelligent, and moral than theists. So let's consider these claims in line with atheism being the default state. If atheism is the default state, and all babies are atheists, then we have to massively reduce the average intelligence of atheists. Why? Well, you give babies an IQ test and you see what they get. I know this seems absurd, but if babies are in the set of atheists, then it's an illogical entailment that they are to be taken into account over issues like intelligence. The issue is exacerbated by including rocks. Morality. Excusing the issue with the statement that many atheists make that morality is wholly subjective and therefore there's no such thing as more or less moral, and statements that they say are much more nonsensical or at very least poorly phrased, we are left with a different issue. When something is amoral, it is judged not to have anything to do with morality, like someone drinking a glass of water. It is neither good nor bad. However, an amoral person is someone that is not concerned whether their actions are good or bad. They can consider what they are doing, and they can even make a moral judgment, but they just don't care. Babies are unmoral. They have the potential to be a moral agent, even if they do not yet possess the cognitive abilities to be one yet. We cannot influence their behaviors in a moralistic way. There is no intent. They are just reacting to various stimuli. Again, with the intelligence issue, with unmoral things in the set of atheists, we seem to have an issue. And again, we have the additional issue when you include rocks. Rocks are non-moral. They have no relation to morality whatsoever. By far the most problematic default state argument is that of rationality. Rationality is complex but can be described as reasoning using the rules of logic and probability theory. We can also say things like holding coherent and consistent beliefs are things that make you rational. If atheism is a default position, then it's not a reasoned position. Therefore, atheism is not a rational position. At best, it is irrational. If babies and rocks are in the set of atheists, then again we have an issue because these things cannot reason and therefore are not rational. So it would seem that we have an issue with contradictory statements here. There is a clear issue with the ideas being conveyed. In the context of everything in this article up to this point, either atheism is the default state or it is a rational position. Either babies are atheists, or atheists are, or at least could be, more intelligent and moral than theists. Either atheism is more than just an absence of a particular mental state, or rocks, churches, turds, and threadworms are all atheists. And a conversation that I love bringing up every now and then. So, how is a rock not an atheist? Do you see atheism as being a considered rational response to theistic claims? Oh, bugger. It's done it again. It's killed my monitor.
Oh, no.
I completely forgot to do that. So it's coming back on. Feel free to read away. Hopefully everything is working. Right, has that messed everything up on the main page, or is it back to normal? Excellent.
It's still blank here at the moment.
It's blank on your end?
Like it's fine on my screen. No.
Okay.
It's come up on YouTube now.
Okay, cool. Do apologise for that little blip. So anyway, how is a rock not an atheist? Well, do you see atheism being a considered rational response to theistic claims? Yes. Okay, so can a rock consider theistic claims? Or on the right-hand side, atheism is based on reason, evidence, and skepticism, or babies are atheists. I mean, it's one of these things, it's contrary positions that we atheists seem to hold, because we're having two different conversations and we're saying what seems to further this conversation and what seems to further this conversation and win the conversations, forgetting that actually when you put those two conversations next to each other, we're contradicting ourselves. So in summary, it would seem that anyone that holds to atheism being a default state and a rational position is holding contradictory beliefs and is therefore irrational. Even if you hold atheism as a lack of belief in gods or not believing in gods, instead of the positive belief gods do not exist, it seems for many of the other statements we atheists make, being an atheist has to at least be a considered response to theism. This is why I, at least in part, see a difference between does not believe and lack of belief. Even though the terms can be used interchangeably, I think if the weak atheist position was described in terms of does not believe instead of lack of belief with this distinction, then there would be a bit more clarity by what people actually mean when using the term. And if you're interested, there's an article on the Answers in Reason website called What is the Difference Between Does Not Believe and Lack of Belief? Now, this may not solve all the issues that could be raised with the ongoing pointless semantic wars, but it does solve the issues with atheism being reduced to an absurd position and people making these absurd statements like rocks are atheist or we are all born atheist and atheism is the default position. And there's a video right at the end of the article, again from Dave, Atheism, A Tale of Two Uses. Now, on that front, I know that Dave and I have a preferred definition of atheism, but we don't tell people they can't be an atheist if they don't hold to our definition. We don't agree with that. What we disagree with is when people make claims like it's only one definition. That's what winds us up a bit and can sometimes draw us, well, especially me, into those really annoying and pointless conversations.
I just post my video now.
Yeah. I'm trying to stay out of them. Sometimes I can't resist. It's almost like I have no free will. If I just switch things back into the other mode, and we'll start going through the comments. If you just hold with us, it should be a lot quicker than me changing it into it. There we go. And we're back in the room. See, I told you it'd be quicker.
That was quick.
Yeah, I get that a lot.
So do I, unfortunately. I can make YouTube shorts porn.
Right, so I've got a lot to wind back and catch up on. So let me move that screen.
Yeah, there was quite a lot.
Wrong one to be brought over. Let me bring... Oops. Just messed up. I'm messing up everything tonight.
Sorry.
Right.
I was going to say, while you're finding them, I'll just mention one comment that's most necessarily needed to be mentioned about how Luke has bad judgment about pineapple on pizza.
Is he objectively immoral there?
He is. He's ruining perfectly good food. And it's immoral to waste food.
Yes. Hi, Shannon. So, what did you miss? Are babies atheists? So, at the beginning of the article, it was just talking about the problems with arguments like atheism is the default position or atheism is the default state, especially if we're just describing an absence of mental state, then it's not a position that you're holding. So it could be regarded as a default state, but even then there was the problem with describing things in terms of mental states. If they don't hold mental states, we gave the example of both rocks and atheists not eating meat, and therefore being able to be considered vegetarian or vegan. But obviously there's a lot more to it than that. And we then broke it down through the lens of other things like identity and, evolution, rationality, intelligence, and morality. So that's generally where we went with that one. Hopefully, if you're interested, I can drop you a link, or there's one actually in the description of the stream. Right, so carrying on. Apparently, Luke has just started reading Being You. Luke, let us know how that goes. Sorry.
And all Seth.
Yes. Carl says, what about all the indigenous tribes that have reported not having a concept of God? So this is obviously, I wouldn't regard them as atheists because they haven't considered the proposition of God's existence. They are absent of that mental state, like a baby is absent of that mental state. They're ignorant of the proposition. Now, Graham Oppy has a term for this, which is innocent. And it's not saying innocent in terms of guilt. It's talking about innocence in terms of naivety or ignorance. They're innocent of the proposition. So there's nothing to be said there. I don't know how else to put it. But they don't have a responsive mental state to the proposition of any gods existing. And when you present it to them, You know, they might think it seems ridiculous, but then at that point, that's when the cognitive abilities start kicking in, and you might have a discussion about gods and talk about what you think God does and so on and so forth. But until that point, until they've actually thought about it and given you a proper response, you know, I don't think you can call them an atheist or an agnostic or anything like that.
And it's worth mentioning that a lot of tribes do have concepts of higher powers or great creators, that kind of thing.
Yeah, they might not actually
not
use the word God.
Yeah.
But yeah, but as you said, there are some that don't have any concept at all. Andy, don't worry. He says, "Sorry, I come up with questions whilst listening. They all stem from the topic." But yeah, that's cool. I don't mind having them. And honestly, if you want to like have a stream on some of your questions at some point in the future, happy to cover off some of them. They could be interesting to discuss. Luke is talking about, he's correcting me, he's saying IQ is based on intelligence relative to the individual's age. So hypothetically, if you gave a baby an IQ test, then the average baby ought to be 100. Fair. Well, would you say the same about rocks then? So what you're saying is that to a great proportion, atheists are incredibly average thinkers. Okay, so here we go again. Default state is a reference to the null hypothesis. Logically speaking, the word null in this context means that it's commonly accepted facts that researchers work to nullify. Okay, but we did address this in the stream. God and God not existing cannot actually be the null hypothesis. God is not a testable hypothesis. You might be able to test certain things like prayer, and we gave an example earlier on in the stream, but there is no real test for God, and so there's also no relation going on there. So atheism is not the null hypothesis, and atheism isn't the default state. There's a video that I've done about the null hypothesis. It's one of the common things that we atheists actually get wrong, because we're using scientific terms. So many atheists love science, right? I think we all do. Well, not all of us, but we do have a big appreciation for science. Yet we use a lot of scientific terminology wrong. When it comes to evolution and things like that, we're always correcting those creationists who are saying it's a changing kind and theory's just an idea. But when it comes to arguments that we're making, we seem to actually forget, you know, the proper use and go for a colloquial use, which I think is kind of bad form. You know, we're holding creationists to a higher standard than we hold our own. Now, this is a 5-minute video about the null hypothesis and how it relates to God. So I'm posting that in the chat. Feel free to check it out, and any comments that you have underneath it, you know, please let me know and I'll get to you probably tomorrow. I've got to scroll back up now and find the comments. Where are we going? God, sorry, there's loads of comments that have come in. I'm just trying to find the last position. So scrolling down. Lots of comments on default state. So default state is not knowing. Well, you could say, coming back to it, the default state of humans is having very, very limited cognitive abilities, and as our consciousness starts to develop, we are prone to things like assigning agency. We are prone to having God beliefs. So Yeah, and the default state saying it's not knowing. I mean, you don't have the ability to even hold knowledge, so it seems silly to me to talk about things in terms of knowledge when you can't actually have knowledge. Does that sound right to you, Dave?
Yeah. Basically, you're born not caring.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I mean, there is a way that you could define the term atheism so that it is the default state. But then it becomes sort of trivially true, sort of like saying all Mixoplixes are Homo sapiens. Socrates is a Homo sapien, therefore Socrates is a Mixoplixel. It's trivially true.
Yeah. I mean, you in the
but
same way that
it's
you
still
could say,
true nonetheless.
Yeah. Well, you could say the same thing. That's why I had the rocks are vegan argument in there.
The vegan.
Because, you know, that if the only thing that defines a vegan as a vegan is the fact that they don't eat any animal products, then, you know, rocks are vegan. There's a little bit more to it than that, just as there's a little bit more to than just a lack of belief. If you use that definition, there's a little bit more than just the absence of a mental state. Something has to be at least able to hold the mental state to really be described in terms of mental states. Just like something has to be able to eat or have some form of energy exchange to be described in terms of eating or said energy exchange.
That's the other thing. You've got to take all the logical entailments that go with it. Yeah.
So Shannon says, I have questions about if there even is such a thing as a default position then. If there isn't, that seems odd to me. So it depends on what you're talking about. A default position on any topic would be you're ignorant of the topic. You know, because you're completely unaware of it. If you're talking about a topic you're aware of, then I suppose it depends on who you are. Some people, when presented new information, are curious. Some people are very resistant to new information. So I don't think we can say that there's any one default position for when someone is presented new information. And as Dave said earlier, the default position for babies is lying down.
I mean, you could say here that there is a kind of default position, an argument that can be made, in that if you are a skeptic and you hold to the framework that you should only accept things that have convincing evidence or are supported well, then the default position is to not accept it. You know, but that depends on the epistemological framework that you're working from. And in order to say that everybody must have this default position, you would have to argue that this is the only epistemological framework that people should be using, that it's objectively this.
Yeah. So, yeah, it depends on where you get from there. So, carrying on. Yes, Luke confirms what I said earlier. You can only have a null hypothesis if you have a hypothesis. And obviously, what's one of the things about a hypothesis? It has to be testable. Otherwise, it doesn't really count as a hypothesis, at least not in scientific terms, and you're using scientific terms. So you could say, oh, I have a hypothesis, as in I have an idea, in a colloquial sense. Right, of course you could. And then you'd be using the null hypothesis in a colloquial sense, and right, it's not really a null hypothesis then. You're just changing definitions of words to further a goal. Berillian says, the default position of babies, so it means they have a burden of tooth. Sorry, Shannon. Are we saying absent being presented with the God proposition, there is no position that can be held? Or are we saying absent being presented with... I I don't know what you mean there. Sorry. Are we saying absent? Sorry.
I'm thinking it's basically if you haven't been presented with some kind of proposition, in this case, the God proposition, then there is no position that you hold on the topic.
Yes, that's exactly it. You're ignorant on the topic. So if you don't actually hold a position in regard to the God proposition, so the default position is ignorance or innocence, as Oppie coined it, basically, to any proposition. You're completely unaware of this thing occurring, and things like babies don't even have the cognitive abilities to consider the proposition. So even if you turned round to them and went, "Oh, by the way, did you know God exists?" They'd go, you know, or they might giggle at you. I don't know. I had to change my t-shirt twice before coming on stream, so that's why I went to the vomit. And yes, Luke, he knows what I'm going to say already. Innocent of the proposition. There you go. I mean, I'd say that because someone much greater than me said that. You know, I used to use ignorant, but I think innocent of the proposition sounds a lot better. Sort of means the same thing anyway.
It's less loaded, though.
Yeah. Although some people do take, when you say innocent, they take it to mean, oh, well, guilty. Then you're saying, like, atheists are guilty. It's like, well, no, why are you getting that? No, innocence can mean, you know, your naivety, your complete lack of awareness with the way the world works and so on. There's many definitions. A lack of guile is one of the common definitions of innocence. So, yeah.
Another thing I think about the innocence thing is that it also fits into the theological framework where people who are innocent don't go to hell. People who've never heard about God don't go to hell. That's the argument, isn't it? The Eskimo argument.
The Eskimo argument, yeah.
Yeah. So in this case, it works in both sets of frameworks.
Yeah, that's fair. Mark says, can we control whether we are truly atheists or believers? Is believer qualified by their chosen state of belief or their unconscious state of belief? I don't think we can choose our beliefs. We are convinced by information. So whether you're an atheist in the sense that you believe gods don't exist, or you're just, you're using some form of non-theist to be atheist, or you're a theist, you don't necessarily choose like your belief. You are convinced by whatever information and arguments, and a lot of it can be your upbringing and the way you think and the tools that you have to consider propositions and reflect on them. So no, I don't think we can control whether we're truly atheists or believers, but that we could, I guess, operate on confirmation bias. We could not look into things further. We could, for example, you might see a lot of creationists only using sites like Answers in Genesis. Right, that's the only thing they do. They won't consider what evolution actually is and the science of evolution because it's all false. And then they might even reject when AIG actually turn around and say, do you know the why monkeys argument is actually bad? And that's because that's not what they actually believe. And they'll reject that as well because that's out of alignment with the memes. So, I mean, we do it on both sides of the fence. So Shannon Q says, you're only an atheist at the point of rejection then. Prior, you're what? You don't have a God belief. I'm in that state. So, like, what are you? Well, you don't have... Atheist is a noun. It's part of an identity. So people identify as atheist, even using different terms of atheist. So different definitions of atheist, I mean. So an ist is a follower of an ism, and you cannot be born an ist by definition. So again, I'd come back and say they're innocent of the proposition. They're not any particular label or an identity. If I identify as an atheist and I seem to fit in with at least one of the definitions of atheist, I think it's fair to say that I'm an atheist. But a baby doesn't identify that way. They don't have that as part of their identity. Again, they're innocent of the proposition. Consider if you were transported somewhere and there was no meat and no animal products whatsoever, and you were forced to eat a vegan diet until you were taken out of this place at some random time in the future. Now, I'm assuming that you're not a vegan. If you are, this obviously doesn't work. But because you're eating a vegan diet, it doesn't necessarily make you a vegan. You don't necessarily identify as a vegan, and you're not choosing to eat a vegan diet. You are being forced to eat a vegan diet. And it's not exactly the same, but a baby doesn't choose or doesn't have the ability to consider the proposition of God's existence. They are simply innocent of the proposition. It can fall into a set of things that are not a theist, but I wouldn't regard that as an atheist because they don't have the identity yet. They don't identify that way. They haven't considered the proposition. And I think it adds no power to any atheistic arguments to say babies are atheists either. In fact, it weakens a hell of a lot of our arguments.
Yeah. And I mean, in philosophy, atheism is considered a rejection. Like, you've got flu and the more hard atheism. Both of those are a rejection. But colloquially speaking, a lot of people just define non-theism as atheism. So if you use that kind of definition, you could be considered an atheist. Really depends on what you prefer.
Yeah. And I think it's fine if anyone wants to identify that way, they're some form of non-theist and they want to identify as an atheist. I don't see any issue with that, really. I have my preferred definition, but I'm not going to tell someone they can't identify how they like. It's a matter of identity. What I do think we shouldn't do is prescribe an identity to someone else. And especially someone that can't say, no, that's not my identity. And equally, we shouldn't, if someone turns around and goes, well, no, actually, I don't want to be called an atheist. I want to be called an agnostic or an ignostic or an apatheist or whatever, then we should respect that as well. We don't go, no, you're an atheist. You can go, oh, okay, well, the way I understand things, you would be. But if that's your label that you choose for yourself, cool. Why do you prefer that label? And have a conversation about it. Don't tell them, no, you can't be that. I'm probably going way past what the intention of your comment was there, though. Sorry. So Andy says, believing is a conclusion. What that conclusion exactly is, and if you can qualify it with a singular words, is another can of worms. So, I mean, what you're talking about there, yeah. What you believe is what you've concluded is the case. It's what you accept is true. It's having a positive attitude towards the proposition. If you can qualify it with singular words is another can of worms. I mean, you're either talking there about the label. I mean, you could say an atheist is a label for someone that holds a particular belief position. But I'd also say part of the qualification is part of the rationality. Are you actually rational in holding or lacking that belief? And again, that's another reason why it's good to have it as a response to a proposition rather than just an absence of a mental state. Twisted says, what would Socrates say? I don't know, I can't speak Greek. Sorry. I don't actually know what that was in relation to, but
maybe being called a mixel-plixel. Could have called him a plucked chicken.
Right. Oh, yes, he probably would. Carl says, they've stated that atheism has both and weak and strong positions prior to this, so I'm sure they accept the lack of belief description. Yeah, I accept that people use the lack of belief description. I just think that it's a responsive lack of belief rather than just describing a pure absence of a mental state. Because if it is just a pure absence of a mental state, you end up in ridiculous positions like rocks are atheists. So I don't care how you want to identify. I have my preferred definition of atheism, which is the belief or proposition gods do not exist, and an atheist is one that accepts that as true. But if you are any one of the other labels that I mentioned earlier, and you decide that you want to be called an atheist, fine, cool. I don't really care. It's your identity. It's why with polysemous words like atheist and atheism, it's good to clarify what someone means, which is why at the beginning of the article, I even stipulated that I was going to be using the absence of belief or lack of belief position and problems with how that can be applied. So it wasn't about the problems with the actual definition, because I do go into that sometimes too. Shannon says, yeah, linguistically that makes sense as a self-label, but if I became aware of someone who had no belief and had never heard of the God concept, what would you call that person? Jeff? What's their name? If you feel the need to label them, I would say that they're innocent of the proposition. Tying back into what we said earlier. So they're an innocent, if you so wish. But then, obviously, if they've got no concept, they've never heard of the God concept, but you've talked about it, they then suddenly do. So then I'd go, well, what do you think about it? And from there's a number of different positions that could be held or not held. But really, I mean, should you be doing that? Going back into the Eskimos argument. Shannon's saying, oh crap, don't read my comments, I'm half drunk. I'll drink to that. Shannon, turning 40 at midnight. Congratulations on making it this far. It won't be long till you level up. Yeah, so Twisted, who I believe is actually a vegan, says, very true, all rocks are vegan, all meat eaters are vegan while sleeping. It shows, again, how absurd certain arguments can get if you just describe it purely on one thing. Don't worry, Shannon. Dave's still older than you.
I don't look too bad for 95.
No, you look fantastic.
Bald spot coming on there, but So coming back to Carl says, right, I set that example of the tribe as evidence towards the proposition that babies do indeed have no mental state. Yeah, I mean it's the same thing. They're both innocent. Would you sort of agree with that, Carl? That that they're basically in the same state. The tribe could possibly understand the proposition, whereas a baby, especially if we're talking an infant, probably couldn't understand the proposition, but it could one day grow to a point where, presented the proposition, it would understand it. But they're both in that state of innocence. Lots of happy birthdays going on. And I think okay, hang on. Here's one.
So think of the word as electricity. Think of yourself as a light bulb. Is your default state to be lit up, or do you need electricity to show light? The default states entail the most basic state. Right.
It depends on whether it's hooked up to a switch or not. Well, it does.
Yeah. The default state of my light out there is to turn on when there's movement. But no, if you're talking about default state, again, the default state of a human is to be completely unable to process the information, and we are prone to certain beliefs. We assign agency, and we are likely to get paranoid and be superstitious and accept God beliefs and form them if we haven't got them ourselves. There has to be a reason for this. Oh, it must be this other thing. We didn't sacrifice a baby to last Thursday, and now look at us, we're in a drought. These things are quite natural. So the default state is not simply, the default state is not having the mental state of belief in a deity, and I said that it's true, but there's more to the description than just absence of a mental state, because if it is just an absence of a mental state, then it applies to things like rocks and threadworms, etc.
And churches and Bibles. And the concept of theism itself.
Yes, exactly. Which is just ridiculous. No one says atheism is the null hypothesis. The null hypothesis is the null hypothesis. People do say atheism is the null hypothesis. Go
to what's his name? Randolph Richardson's site.
Defineatheism.com.
And he's got it on there that atheism is the null hypothesis.
And you do see it come up all the time. Because they're using it in a colloquial way. They're not using null hypothesis in a scientific way. They're just saying that that the opposite of something existing is not existing. Not existing is null hypothesis. It's the null. That's wrong. Even in binary, zero is not the same as null. So even if you have 1 and 0, but yes. And you're right, the null hypothesis is the null hypothesis, but you might describe a hypothesis for being the null hypothesis. So an example that we gave earlier was for H1, that would be vaccinations will reduce the number of hospitalizations for COVID. And the null hypothesis would be there'd be no significant difference between having everyone vaccinated and not vaccinated for the hospital administrations. That would be your H0 or your null hypothesis. So that's how it works. And a hypothesis has to be something that is testable. So again, it's why you can't really regard it in that way. So Kyle says, so what would be the null hypothesis? Is there none applied to this subject? Well, no, I mean, it's a metaphysical problem rather than a physical one. It's not a scientific problem. There is nothing to be tested. So there isn't a null hypothesis. You could form an experiment to test certain qualities. If you have a God which is expected to affect the world in a physical way, then you could test for that effect. And like, for example, the efficacy of prayer. So again, you could set one up saying prayer is going to make people heal more, and you could have loads of control groups going up and a number of different hypotheses, but the null hypothesis would be that there's no significant difference between the people being prayed for and the people not being prayed for. That's how the null hypothesis works. It's relational. It's like there's no real difference. That's why you have people on placebo in medical trials, because if 50% of people have sugar pills and feel better, and 50% of people have the real drug, then there's no significant difference between the people getting the real drug and the people getting the sugar pills. And therefore, you'd say, well, okay, this drug doesn't work. So there you go. Lone Wolf says you cannot have a null hypothesis for a thing that cannot be nullified. I mean, that's basically what we were saying. So I think you're on the same lines with us in that, but it is a claim that comes up. So there are some of us atheists do say it. It's just using the term in a colloquial way. So Shannon says, innocence is the default state then. I can see how that's colloquially indistinguishable to a degree. In the Euler diagram, they both fall under no God belief. It's true. But again, you come back to rocks not having a God belief, churches not having a God belief. There's so many things that have no God belief. And I think that there is a little... Sorry,
carry on.
I was just going to say there's a little bit more to all the things than just no God belief. But sorry, go for it, Dave. Oh, you've frozen there.
I was just going to say, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're back.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say, if we go by those sort of terms, then the actual physical state of the mental state is atheist.
Yes.
Or is in a state of atheism or is atheistic.
So Lone Wolf says that's why we're misusing the phrase default state. I mean, we're talking against people who say atheism is the default state. So I think maybe your argument isn't with us. Default state of a baby is no state at all. Or, it cries when it's hungry and it's carried around and it can barely lift its head, and it doesn't have the ability to process things. So I think I need a bit more clarification on why you think we're misusing the phrase default state there.
The default mental state of a baby is confused.
Sorry. Twisted is happy to accept rocks into the community of vegans. Question from Andy. To have a label of a position, does one have to have decided on a proposition? So by that, have you concluded one way or another? Not necessarily. I mean, the word agnostic can be used in a number of different ways, but when you're talking about the psychological state of being agnostic or weak agnosticism, it's talking about being undecided. So the position that you take is that you can't decide one way or another. So you can be agnostic on a number of things, but in regards to the proposition God exists, you would, and this is just going for the three epistemic answers. I'm not getting into the debate wars. I'm just explaining how it would be used in this. So the theist would believe a God exists. The atheist would believe a God does not exist, and an agnostic would be unsure either way. Now, obviously, I know with the way it often works on the internet that many people would refer to that agnostic as an atheist as well. All forms of non-theists are atheist. If you want, that's fine. I prefer concise and specific labels because it allows me to accurately infer what people do and don't believe. But I realize language is a messy thing, and people generally are not using words in the same way. So I try to go, what do you mean by that? And that's why in the 10 questions for atheists video that I did was, right, what's your label and what does it mean to you? Because then I can understand how they're approaching things, rather than just me going, well, are you this, or this? Well, then you're that, and telling them what their identity is. No, what is your identity, and what does your identity mean to you?
And just to expand that a little, you can take a position on whether or not you like Slayer or Anthrax. That's not propositional. It's just how you feel about a particular thing.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. You could phrase it as a proposition.
Yeah, but you wouldn't like it. You wouldn't be making a choice based on that proposition. You would be the creator of that proposition.
Yes,
yeah.
Cool. Sorry, just trying to get through the chat as well. So, Philip says, it seems important to be able to distinguish between someone who finds God exists just as likely as God doesn't exist, and between someone who never encountered the idea, which I think it's true. And also the other positions as well. I think that for these sorts of dialogues, I mean, the way I see language is obviously it's a method of communicating ideas. And the reason I like concise and specific labels is because they allow to break down that communication. If I know someone is talking about things in the same way as me, then I don't have to stop and go, well, what do you mean by that? I realize on the internet, generally, I am going to have to either stipulate my use or say, what do you mean by that? And that's fine. That's the way it goes. And I think good communication does have a bit of that in it. But clear and concise labels do allow you to cut through that bit of the conversation and get to the meat of the topic. So you're an atheist, so you find the concept of God's so meaningless that it's not even a proper proposition of truth at all, because there's no truth value there. Okay, what about it do you find so incoherent and ill-defined? But yes. So Lionel says, the default position is the single fact that is agreed upon in a set of propositions. Exactly. So that was the point I made earlier, that it's not actually a position on the topic at all. Saying default position is a bad take. I disagree with saying it's a default position, because you're not actually having a position on the topic. Your position, if we're thinking about it in terms of a football field, you're not on the football field at all. You're off over there, right? You have no position. So a baby has no position on the topic. So saying that the default position is starting from a point of ignorance, then you're setting yourself up for a huge set of Dunning-Kruger issues centered around bias. What?
I kind of see what he's getting at. In other words, people can start ignorant and then start just making all these claims and thinking they know these things just from perceptions or what have you. But even people that are mildly educated on a topic, or have heard a word said, or have some kind of idea, can also be a huge set of Dunning-Kruger effect.
Oh, yeah, definitely. All the time, though. I mean, on the Dunning-Kruger effect, it affects us all. And sometimes we're not even aware when it's affecting us. It affects you. It affects me, you know. I mean, you see it all the time with really prominent scientists getting involved in things that they don't have much clue on, philosophy and history and all of that, but thinking they know the best because, you know, they're at the top of their field. And you know what? In their field, at least at their time, they may well have been the best and knew everything about it. But just because they're absolutely brilliant in one area, they can't just instantly think they're brilliant at everything else. But I think being aware that you know, your default state on a proposition that you've just heard is ignorance, well, that's fine, isn't it? If you tell me something I don't know about, you tell me, I don't know, you tell me something about the tectonic plates that I didn't know about. I go, oh, really? Oh, well, I'll have to look into that. You know, I'm not necessarily falling into a set of Dunning-Kruger issues. If I turned around and went, no, that's not true because I learned this thing in science when I was younger and blah, 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 you know, thinking I knew better than you straight away just because I was ignorant, that would be falling into Dunning-Kruger a bit. But being aware of your ignorance hopefully helps sidestep the Dunning-Kruger at least a little bit. But yes.
How dare you say I suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect? What's that behind me? No, I
Proof
suffer from it
that you've got it.
That is the Dunning-Kruger effect, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, who needs a philosophy degree anyway? Especially two. Okay, here's a good question, actually. At least the first bit I read of it. Can biases be default? If there's nothing but your own bias, what would it be? Do you reach decisions without other commonly expressed decisions? So, can biases be default? Right, so there are certain things that we are evolutionary biased towards. Tribalism is one of them. In fact, there was actually a study that babies are racist. And I'm going to bastardize this because I can't remember it in full. But you know, babies didn't react as well seeing people who are very different to them, obviously speaking color of the skin, than people who are similar to them. It's built into us, our tribal nature. It's not saying that it's necessarily a good thing, but explaining behavior is not the same as excusing it. And I think we are at least somewhat rational beings, and we have to try and overcome our biases, be aware of our biases and try and overcome them. Yeah, I mean, that's an example of a bias that's quite innate. I also mentioned that we're prone to assigning agency, so we're prone to superstition. I suppose you could call that a form of bias as well, because you're more likely to swing that way than not. If all you had was your biases and you had no knowledge other than biases, you'd be a purely instinctual creature, I guess. Like Dave right now, completely frozen. Nothing but instinct. Carl says, I think we get too strict with the language sometimes. If it's an exercise in logic, I'm all right. Yeah, I mean, I've actually got another article that sort of ties into the logic of different types of not believing and how logically that they can all be described in the same state of not believing, but at the same time they are psychologically different because there's different ideas going on in our head. So it's sort of combining the two types of not believing either the proposition is true or false, but how we could actually be in different mental states, which I'll probably release within the next couple of weeks. I spend ages sitting on my articles, and even then, I mean, I'm sure you noticed tonight there's so many grammatical errors, but dyslexic blogger for the win. That's an interesting point. So Shannon says, if I could have decided to, should have remained a believer. I wanted to badly when I deconstructed. I mean, I think when I first doubting Christianity and looking for other things, I mean, I wanted to believe so badly that I believed so many different religions. I went into so many different pagan religions and the like, and looked into all of them. And I strongly just transferred my belief, and then it ebbed away, and transferred and ebbed away. And for the longest time, I was sort of in and out of between being agnostic and some form of theist. And then eventually I was just like, no, no, I believe none of them exist. Gods, that is, not religions. Obviously, the religions exist. Can we be convinced if there's no other information? So, input without information. If nothing was ever defined, why would you seek to purpose its existence? Well, you do have information.
What?
You've got experiential information. That's what empirical data is. So if you've got your bias, your bias, which is part of your bias, and the certain things that happen. So we're prone to assigning agency, right? There's a rustle in the bush, and we think it's something. There's no other information other than your experience there. And it's the same sort of thing for gods. There would be, they might have regularly sacrificed an animal, and then one time they didn't do it, and just by chance the rains weren't as good, so their crops died, or so on and so forth. Oh, we didn't do the ritual, or we didn't do the ritual right, or we didn't do the ritual enough, and all of a sudden they're making that conclusion. So there's no other information other than their experiences, but there is other information. There is always information. If you're talking about, could you make a decision if you're just a brain in a vat that's never been taught anything other than having these biases? No. Because I don't even know how that would work. How would your brain develop and be able to process these ideas? I mean, maybe that's a question for a psychologist. Luke, Shannon, you're up. Brina, hey, sorry, I'm way behind in the chat messages. I've just seen that you're here. Yes, Tuesdays and Thursdays are when we tend to stream. Nice to have you here. I do apologise for not getting to your 10 questions, Brina. I will get to them tomorrow. I had one of those mental days where I was distracted as well by so many different things and didn't really manage to get much of anything done, and a very busy and stressful evening. So I do apologise. I will do my best. Okay, so are Christians atheists against Islamists and Hindu? I would say no, but the Islamist and the Hindu might regard the Christian... In fact, the Hindu wouldn't, because the Hindu tend to look at all the other religions and say... they're all just different aspects of their God, and Islamists, they tend to believe in the same God as Christians do. They just have a slightly different take. So, I know sometimes they argue that it's not the same God, but it is the same God. It's the Abrahamic deity. But if you were to use a completely different religion where it doesn't necessarily fall in, let's just say the Norse gods. Okay. In fact, no, let's use the Greek gods, because the definition of atheism goes way back to ancient Greece. And atheos was first used for anyone who had lost favor of the gods. So they were godless because they didn't have the support of the gods, even though they believed in them. It then started to be used for anyone that didn't believe in the gods of the state. So Christians were regarded as atheos by the ancient Greeks. Christians then went on to refer to pagans as atheos as well. Over time, the term went through a number of changes, and it hit the French, and it came into English from the French. And atheist was sometimes used as a slur by Christians for people that were not even acting in accordance with the Bible. So they were essentially a practical atheist. So the term has been used in a practical sense. They could still have been a theist of some kind. But to go back to your question, are Christians atheists to another religion? No, because the definition of a theist is one that believes in at least one God. So they are not, but they might be told that, no, you're believing in the wrong God, but they still believe in a God, even if it is the wrong God and that God does not exist. There you go.
Ricky Gervais is an idiot.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, if you're going to get your philosophy from a comedian, you can expect it to be a joke. It's kind of funny that we're born without a position, we're introduced to theism, and rationally we still walk away with having a position not much different from the beginning. I'd say that there's quite a bit of a difference in the position. There's a hell of a lot more of your psychology being engaged. You do have a position on the topic, even if you hold to suspensive judgment. Rather than believing gods don't exist, you're holding to a suspensive judgment. You're just lacking belief both ways. It's still a responsive position. You're holding that position, and you can hopefully justify why you're in whatever position you're in, any form of non-theist, if you decide to call it atheist, whatever. Whereas being born without a position, there is no psychology going on there.
Well, this is sort of where the distinction between different types of not believing comes in. You're born not believing, as in you can't actually hold a position on the topic. And when you hear the actual claim and you say, I don't believe that, that's a different type of not believing, because you're rejecting the claim.
Yeah, exactly. Mark says, babies aren't innocent. They are manipulative little tyrants that have us doing everything for them. Agreed.
That's why I don't have any.
They're still innocent of the proposition, though. But I agree. Yeah. They're not innocent. They're all bastards. Shannon. Not made a single quote tweet since the last stream. Today it physically hurt me not to do it a few times, but I bit it and put down my phone. Well done. Seriously, I'm sorry if that sounded weird. But no, I think it's something that we're all really, really prone to do. And I think it can be something that is harmful, like I said. And it can be really hard to resist that urge. Really, really, really difficult to do so. But honestly, fair play to you. Yes, sorry. And if anyone is interested, that was our stream about power that we did with Brina. Was it last Tuesday or Thursday? Either way, it's in the SciPhi playlist. It should be in the top. So yes, that was a conversation about power and big content creators and how it can be abused and all those things. But yeah, it can be really, really difficult to resist the urge to quote tweet some fuckwit. But carrying on. Sorry, where I'm missing. I mean, I read one and I skimmed past it, and now I can't see it. I hopefully didn't delete your message by mistake as I was going through. Sorry. Okay, so question from Carl Eaton. How do you prove gods don't exist, though? Do you reject gods do exist because you know they don't, or because we have incomplete information? So, I mean, this is a massive question to unpack, but I'm going to do a really short version. But Dave and I actually have justifications for why we believe gods don't exist. So the first thing is to say you don't have to prove gods don't exist. That's not part of if you're holding a belief position, you're not making necessarily a knowledge claim. You're saying you believe they don't, and the burden of proof isn't to prove they don't exist, it's to prove that your position is a rational one. And you do that by providing a number of different arguments and things like that. So it would be a culmination of a number of different arguments I might have that all add up. It's not one argument that does it. So you could combine divine hiddenness, problem of evil, contradictions in various holy books, claims that go against each other and contradict each other. I mean, blimey, trying to do it in as quick as possible, and my brain is dying. But there's also certain things, like there are some gods that are described to be in logically impossible ways. So if we think about things like a square circle, it's logically impossible, or a triangle with 5 sides, again, logically impossible, right? It's definitionally not the case of what it is. Water that isn't H2O. Well, no, water is definitionally H2O. There are a number of things. So you could actually say that there are certain God claims that are put forward that the way they are described, that God cannot exist. Now, it doesn't mean that that God is not based on some other deity. You're not saying that you're proving without a doubt that God doesn't exist. But the way that claim has been laid out, you've shown that there's logical contradictions, and therefore that God cannot exist. So does that does that sort of answer that question? Do you have anything to add? I know I was rushing through it, Dave.
No, that's good. I mean, Philip put the divine hiddenness syllogism in there, so.
Oh, nice. And we did do a stream on divine hiddenness with Philip and Alistair as well. And yeah, I mean, if you're interested, check that out. And Philip, what's up with your divine hiddenness article, man? Like, I've been waiting for this. So yeah. But yes, so just to clarify, though, you know, believing God does not exist is not the same as saying you know gods don't exist. Knowledge is a subset of belief, a very specific kind of belief, whereas a belief is just simply something you accept as true. So if I believe gods do not exist, I'm not making a knowledge claim. I'm just saying, I'm describing my mental state, my attitude, and my burden is to justify that, should I say, well, to myself. The burden's to myself. But in a conversation, if we were having a dialogue and, you know, there is a discursive burden there, I guess, because we've entered a social contract of having a conversation about this particular thing, and therefore I would justify my position to you and we could discuss things in more detail. Yeah, who is arguing that theism should be the default position? No one is. Oh, you know what? I'm still like 40 minutes behind the chat. I am trying to catch up with the chat. I do apologize. Yes. I should just skip through them. There's some jokes going on in there. So, sorry guys, I'm just trying to get through all the chat. I know I do my best to try and answer all of your comments. Luke says, a vegan, an atheist, and a Man U supporter walk into the bar. I know because they all told me as soon as they entered. It's fair. I mean, a lot of them can be quite outspoken. I think you can get that pretty much anywhere. Some people are very outspoken. But the average vegan isn't like the ones that you hear about. Just like the average atheist probably isn't like the ones you hear about. And well, fuck all Man U supporters, basically. I say that as someone who couldn't give a shit about football in any way, shape, or form, but, you know, fuck them. Philip is going to give a few for Carl Eaton. Actually, on our justifications front, there we have a playlist called SciPhi Highlights, and in there's a 20-minute video where Dave and Joe justify why they believe gods don't exist or something like that. So if you're interested in that, feel free. But yes, Philip's got a lot that he can provide as well. And to be honest, in the video, even though it was 20 minutes long, it was still giving a quick overview of some of the arguments. There's a hell of a lot more that go into it. Carrying through all of that, I am... I'm trying. So there's more talk on the null hypothesis. The null hypothesis deals with that which can be assessed empirically, which is the entirely wrong approach if you're searching for evidence for God. God, according to theology, is immaterial. I mean, that's one thing that we did mention earlier. It's a metaphysical claim. It's not physical, therefore science can't really test it. But if you do have a claim that a god affects the physical, then you could have a test around that. So you could have an experiment built up for prayer. But I've already given that example twice tonight, so I'm not going to go that in. This is Twisted says, does the absence of a null hypothesis cross over into Huxleyan agnosticism at some point? I'd say it could. Huxley would say that you shouldn't say you know or believe that which you have no scientific evidence for. So if you've got scientific evidence, surely you can produce a test of some sorts. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that there's a definite, 1-1 link there, but when you think about it in those terms, yeah, I hadn't thought about it in that way, so I'm still a little bit thinking about it. But thank you, Twisted. Yeah. Theism is atheist. Philip's fault. Okay, so Lone Wolf says, I'm referencing more the article you were reading earlier. My criticism isn't really with your talking points, but didn't like the article's usage of the terms default position and default state. Fair. I was trying to use it in the way people were using the terms. I mean, to be honest, for the sake of it, I didn't like the way I was using atheism as a lack of belief in gods in that article, but that's the way atheism is often used. So, yeah, there's certain terminology in there that I might not like, but I'm still using it because it's the way it's being used. Yeah, cafe. Aaron Ra tried to backpedal, say, okay, rocks aren't atheists, but they're atheistic. Yeah, do you know why he changed it to atheistic? Because I told him, I think you mean atheistic, because atheist is the noun, atheistic is the adjective. But yes, and it still doesn't work. Because, you know, by that logic, churches and Bibles and religions are all atheistic, even though they could be theistic. Mark, nice to have you, as always. He says he's got to go make some money. The forgery industry is a hard master. Just questions. Atheism is a totally reasonable default position. If it's a default position, then how can it be reasoned? If you're saying something's reasonable, then you've approached it by reason. So how can it be a default position? I think you might have missed the entire article and the problems with referring to things in that way. I am an atheist. I hold the belief gods don't exist, and I appreciate that there are other atheists out there that use the lack of belief or absence of belief definition. The problem is what they are describing is not a default position, because if it's just the absence of a mental state, then it's not a position on a topic. So there you go. Homeless is the null hypothesis. I don't own a house, so I'm homeless. There you go. That's one thing that you lack. Even though you do have a home, but you don't own a house. You could even say that you're houseless, even though you might not be houseless, because you could be renting said house as well. There is a problem with a lot of terminology, defining something by one thing that it lacks, and also using terminology in ways that is colloquial. Colloquialisms are definitely problematic in a number of arenas. Icarus, my default position is Dunning-Kruger. I know everything about Dunning-Kruger. I swear, Icarus just comes on to see how many times he can make me laugh. So Carl says the issue seems to be, instead of the default position being to not believe, the default is actually not being aware of the concept altogether. Exactly, that's the point. The default is being innocent of the proposition, you know, or ignorant of the proposition, or unaware of it. You're completely absence of any awareness of the concept, the proposition, or whatever. So that's what the default state is, and it's. I would say that it's not a position on the topic, because when you're talking about a position like this, you're saying that my position on this topic is. So therefore, it's a response to the topic rather than simply an absence. You know, you wouldn't refer to an absence of a position as a position. It seems at least somewhat counterintuitive to me. The bias is a good one. We're biased towards ourselves not having biases. I haven't heard of the bias, but it does sound quite familiar. It also sounds a bit like the fallacy. But yes. Being dyslexic is the default state. Well, it very much is for me. As far as I'm aware, I was born that way. Blimey, I'm almost caught up. I'm now only about half an hour behind the messages. At this moment, Dave is going to sing us a little song. Oh, Lucas asked me what the question was. I don't know. What was the question I asked Shannon and Luke, Dave?
I don't know. That was a long time ago. I'm 95. I'm senile.
And I'm just an idiot. So sorry, Luke. We'll have to wind back the video and find out what the question was for the two of you.
I think maybe the built-in biases, because it's a question of psychology.
Yes. Yes. Oh, no, that was it. No, you've reminded me. It was asking, Luke, if you're still there, if a brain was, say the brain in the vat.
The brain in the vat, yeah.
And it might have the biases, but it had no other information being put into it. I mean, how could it think about anything, really? Because we develop with outside stimuli, and we respond to outside stimuli. So if all we've got is, a couple of biases that we might have as standard, I can't see how our mind would ever develop. But it was just asking you guys if actually a mind could somewhat develop under those conditions, or if it would just die. Philip, yeah, there's always room for nuance if you dig deeper. I agree. Yeah. And yeah, Christians were the original atheists. Just questions.
No, not exactly.
Not exactly, but atheists. They're not the original ones either.
They were considered atheists. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's fun to put it in that term. But yeah, there were others around that time. I mean, Socrates would have been regarded as atheist, wouldn't he?
He was, yeah.
Though he did have
even though he believed in a god.
Mover, yeah.
In a prime mover, yeah.
Which we'd probably say in today terms as a form of a god. So yeah. Sorry. Lone Wolf says, "Who's Ricky Gervais?" It seemed to be something you were saying earlier. So he's a comedian that I don't find particularly funny. I don't particularly like his manner, although that I have seen a couple of shows like Afterlife that I thought were really, really good, actually. So I can appreciate some of his work, but he comes up with really, really terrible philosophical arguments and spouts them out, and a lot of atheists lap him up, and he makes so the one that related to what you said earlier was I'm almost as atheist as you, I just go one god further, and things like that. So it's a bit like, well, no, because the definition of a theist is someone that believes in at least one god. So sorry if that one seems a bit out of touch. Oh, look! I'm only 27 minutes behind now. Right, there's talk about having knowledge of God and things like that. Ozymandias did a very good disproof of the biblical Yahweh as justification of burden of proof for atheism. If you don't know Ozymandias Ramses II, you should check out his YouTube channel. I know he doesn't really post anymore, but he's absolutely fantastic. We had him on, actually, and we had... a conversation about new atheism and lacktheism and the burden of proof for atheists, and it was really enjoyable. And it was when we were first starting out as well. I mean, you might think that things look shit now, but I tell you, they look so much worse back then. Icarus. I have no scientific evidence that Huxley existed. There's some empirical evidence. It might not be testable like scientific evidence is, but it, would he take that? Huxley was more speaking about metaphysical matters, but it did turn into being used into a broader sense, and over time that's why we've got the current uses of how agnostic is used as well. Okay, so Kimo says, my little bark of agnosticism seems to be tacking dangerously close to the shoals of non-cognitivism. What do you think of that, Dave? I think I'd have to understand how you're using agnosticism there, Kimo. Are you talking about theological non-cognitivism? I think you must be. And I'd say that's more ignosticism than agnosticism, using the way I use the terms. But from a logical point, they are the same. They're don't believe the proposition true or false, but non-cognitivism would probably be closer to it's not even a valid proposition. That your understanding?
You could reject it, or say you don't believe for emotional reasons, like, well, I don't know. So it would be sort of non-cognitivist then.
Yeah, that's fair.
Saying I don't know. But generally, agnosticism is seen as having assessed the proposition. So it really depends on what Kimo means.
Just seen Randolph pop in as well. Hello, Randolph. How you doing? I'm almost caught up. I'm almost caught up on the chat, guys. I'm skimming through it. So Lone Wolf says, I hate to define things by characteristics they lack. This is my principal issue with the term atheist. It doesn't tell you anything about the person. The word describes nothing. Well, I mean, if you think about how the term is usually used in philosophy, it isn't talking about characteristics that they lack. It's that they hold the belief gods do not exist. So it tells you at least, one attitude towards the proposition God exists. Now, it doesn't necessarily tell you if they're rational in that position. You have to have a conversation with them. And I'd agree with you. Not many things are actually defined purely by characteristics they lack. I mean, bald is more than just an absence of hair. Because if I shave my head, then I have adopted that hairstyle, but I'm not actually bald. Being bald is more could be a number of things, but often like a hormonal imbalance, and that causes your hair to thin to a point where it basically just breaks off as it comes out of your head, rather than it being just a lack of hair. And this is a problem with defining things purely by one characteristic that they lack. Yes, there might be some element of lacking in there, but there's other characteristics as well.
One sense in which it may be useful to define people by what they lack is in advertising.
Yes, this is true. Yeah, so to Lone Wolf says, I wouldn't describe green to you by telling you it's not blue or red. No, that's true. In fact, it's really hard to describe a color to someone. Actually, have you ever tried doing it? Actually, describing a color, it's really, really, really hard. The closest you can really do is go, well, green. It's the color of grass and the color of like a lot of leaves, except when they're dying.
It's experiential.
It's the color of this room. Yeah, it's experiential. I mean, you could describe the waveform, but that wouldn't really tell someone what green looked like. You're just describing some physical properties. But again, it's different to the actual experience of green. I mean, we're getting close into the realm of Mary's room here.
It's what Mary's room describes, basically.
Zivra says, I've been waiting to catch a discussion related to atheism. How are you doing? Nice to have you here. You have finally caught us all live. So yes, if you have any questions, let us know. We're trying to get through the chat. I am so far, well, I was so far behind. I'm almost caught up now. So tonight we did an article reading, and it's talking about problems with things like default position and default state arguments, and other issues along those lines, and how certain definitions can be applied in a terrible way. I have 2 types of dyslexia. Does this make me a double negative? Maybe. Do they counteract each other and you can write perfectly? Because if so, yeah. Everyone spam the chat and you'll never catch up. Yeah, well, if you do that, you know what we'll do? We'll just blame Philip, because everything is Philip's fault. Me catching up the chat is the human equivalent of a dog chasing its tail. Well, I'm only 6 minutes behind now. And I'm skimming some of these. So yeah. If we keep chatting, we can force Joe to never end the stream. Yeah, I did say I was going to end this one at 10, didn't I? An hour and 9 minutes after that time. So this is one that relates to what we were saying earlier. The burden of proof just means that you have to justify your position to be rational. That applies to all positions: theism, atheism, agnostic. So this is what we were saying. A belief position, even lacking a belief, something, is a response to a proposition, is that, you don't have to prove like God exists or God does not exist unless you are claiming that they definitely do. What you're saying with I believe that or I don't believe that, you have to prove that you hold a rational position. But even then, that burden is an internal burden. You have to sort of prove it to yourself, justify it to yourself. However, when you enter a conversation with someone, there's a sort of social contract formed. So if someone says, oh, this is my God, and you just go, well, I don't believe you, and you refuse to justify why, then you're not really holding up your end of the social contract. And really, like, why are you getting into these sorts of conversations? Why are you putting yourself out there if you're not willing to actually justify why you do or don't believe a proposition or its negation? Virillion has a point as well. The burden of proof is synonymous with the burden of justification. If you hold no burden of proof, you can't justify it. So yes, I mean, I think some people do like to separate the two. Burden of proof is more of a legal term that keeps being used in informal debates and general conversations, and it doesn't really apply to general conversation. But what it means is the burden of justification. And that's why I say it's to justify your position as rational or prove your position is rational rather than prove the proposition true or false. There's some other stuff going on there about flat Earth, spherical Earth, lacking things. I do apologise for skimming at this point because I just wanted to say I've caught up on the chat. Yeah. That was great, guys. Actually, thank you so much for so many comments. I didn't expect there to be quite so many to keep me chatting for probably over an hour after finishing reading the article. So that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you. Dave, is there anything you want to add at this point?
No, it's all good. It was. I agree with what the article's saying. Although we should have a debate with Randolph about whether just not believing something has a burden of proof.
Ooh. Randolph, you up for it? Not right now.
Not that I'm evil
obviously.
or anything.
No, and not right now. But I'd be up for having a conversation
right
about
now.
that in the future. If you'd like to come on, Randolph, we have said for a while if you'd like to have a conversation about things, then it'd be good. But yeah. And yes, I do know your views on atheism, and that's why I said, like, even if you do hold to a particular definition, like the absence of a belief, it still should be a responsive absence of holding a belief. Like, I don't care how someone wants to identify themselves. Well, I don't think we should put that identity onto others, because if it is just the absence of a mental state, then it does get to the point where you make absurd things like rocks are atheists, and then you can also say rocks are vegans, and so on and so forth, and it's just silly. And I think that we should spend more time thinking about what actually adds quality to the conversation and how we can come from stronger positions rather than making the default position, null hypothesis, babies are atheists, rocks are atheists style arguments, because I think that it weakens our position. And if any theist is doubting their theism, they might look at us and go, what a bunch of idiots, I'm not going over there. Yeah. But yeah. But yes, so Randolph, if you are up for that, we'll have that as a conversation. And I know you wanted to talk about something else. So if that has progressed, then feel free to have a chat about that either at the beginning and the end of that conversation. But yeah, awesome. So just to let you know, on Thursday we have a stream. And I've already forgotten when that is, Dave, so you can tell them.
Phil Paper survey.
Oh, yes. So on Thursday, we're going to be going through the Phil Paper survey, going through each section of it and giving our thoughts and how we would respond. We will be giving a really brief overview about what each concept is. Not going into the detail that might be needed for some of these concepts. So it is something that some of them will require some base understanding of the topics, and there are going to be parts on there. I've read through the survey, and there are some things on there where I'm just going to have to go, I don't have an opinion on this yet. I don't know. But there are other things that I do have quite a strong opinion on as well. And I could be completely wrong in my opinion, as I often am. But hopefully Dave will agree with me at least once. In 100 questions.
I'm just going to take the alternate stance just to be a pain in the ass. Was there 100 questions?
There were 30.
It was more like 30 or 40.
No, I think there were 30 on the original. I didn't actually count, but when I looked at the difference between the Phil Papers survey from 2009 to 2020 was that it went from 30 questions to 100 questions. Whether the output is 100, there, I don't know. They might have left a lot of those questions off on the thing. I just read that when I was looking for it because, you know, you gave me the link and I was an idiot and didn't see the link. So I Googled myself and that popped up as an article as talking about the difference between 2009 and 2020. But yeah, I've skimmed through them and there were definitely a lot more questions, but it didn't feel like there were an extra 70 questions. So it probably isn't that many, or they haven't been put out.
I'm just thinking, do the one that Caneby and Axioms on Trial did, because that was quite shortish. The one that
you
link
linked
in
to,
thing,
yeah. But yeah,
plus you can get filtered responses like atheism and theism in the philosophy of religion as well as philosophy in general.
Yeah,
and get different results like that. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Well, I mean, I think you boot it up and you take us through that one. I mean, I've done like the lion's share of the chatting cod shit tonight, and it's your turn.
I get to pretend that I actually know something about philosophy, but nobody else knows enough to be able to question me. So
this is true. No. Hang on, who can we get on? Cool. All right. Well. In that case, yeah, hopefully you'll join us for the Phil Papers survey on Thursday. We've got a few other things in the works. Obviously, there's the responses to 10 questions for theists and 10 questions for atheists. I've actually done the intro videos, but that's as far as I've got. I've got ideas of how I want to do it. We're going to do one question per episode, but it's trying to find the time to record it. And it might be that, I mean, I've got some time off over Christmas, so it might be that we use one of those days to record as much as we can and start releasing some of the videos. You know, I've got a busy life and a family, and I can't always be doing too much. Might be that we once a month miss a stream day and record a video or something like that, but we'll work it out. I'm really looking forward to getting into this because there have been some amazing response from theists and from atheists, and there have been some amazingly bad responses from theists and atheists too, and there's been the average ones in between. And I think that having a nice selection of both be really good, and it gives us a discussion point. And there are some really good responses that I strongly disagree with, but they are still really good responses, and they've given me a lot to think about as well. And it's always good to have stuff that makes you think.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if Luke is planning on doing a stream, but Luke recently has been streaming on his channel Bearded Heretic on Wednesdays and Fridays at about 7 or 8 o'clock. So keep your eyes peeled for that. It's always an enjoyable stream. And as for anyone else, feel free to dump your links. But yeah. Cafe, yes. From what I looked into, Dwayne Johnson is a theist, so Rock's a theist. Kid Rock, I believe, is also a theist.
He's one of those weird American kind of patriotic Christian type people.
So 2 Rock's a theist. What about Chris Rock, though?
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure.
No.
Yeah. There you go. Randolph, the questions for atheists video is published, and all the video responses are in a playlist. So you can indeed have a look and answer them if you so wish. There have been plenty of text responses and a few video responses. I think we've got about 12 or 13 video responses. So yeah, feel free to add your own in there.
And we got Brina's last night.
Oh yes, we did get Brina's last night, and I still haven't checked that out, and I'm really sorry, Brina. Again, as I said, I've had a bit of a shit day, and hopefully I will get the chance to watch it tomorrow over a cup of tea or something like that. So yeah. Rev, nice to see you. Sorry to tell you though that we're on our way off. And thank you everybody who has joined in tonight. Hopefully I got to most of your comments. I really appreciate all the interaction that has been in the chat. I absolutely love it. I am sorry I couldn't keep up with all of it, but I tried. And thank you to everybody who is watching the rerun or the podcast. And Dave, thank you as well for being here.
No worries.
Yes, Icarus. Yes, I've got to put that one up because I always forget to do it. Click the like button, which is atheist. And thank you as well, Randolph. So anyway, you've been watching the Fresh Air Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
And have yourself a good night, and we shall see you Thursday.